Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. This is the next video in the live conversation series with the UiPath aspirant. The topic for today's video is assets. So recently I was being approached by a UiPath aspirant. She was having certain doubts on assets, that what are assets, what are the scenarios where I should use assets, and when and where exactly the assets come in picture. So I thought of recording the session, and let us see what exactly are we going to cover in this session. So let us see what we are going to cover in this video. We'll start by looking at various scenarios that are related to path, saving credential, multiple automation, context of separate environments. I'll give example and we'll try to see that how exactly asset fits in these scenarios. Post that, we are going to explore the four asset types: the text, integer, bool, and the credential. We would be creating some assets in orchestrator. We will try to use the same in UiPath Studio. We will use different activities such as get credential, type secure text, set text activity, and all of this. Also, in the description for all of this topic, there is a timestamp which is mentioned. So in case if you directly want to jump to the specific topic, you can always click on the timestamp and the video will navigate directly to that topic. Also, before proceeding, in case you also want to have such live conversation with me, you can always drop me a note on the email ID which is mentioned in the description, and we can take it forward from there. Having said that, let's get started. First of all, what do you know about asset? You tell me.
What I know is about like asset is a kind of variable which we use in orchestrator.
Okay.
And there are four types of assets like one is a text, another is integer,
Mm-hmm.
third is bool, and another fourth one is the credentials.
Okay.
So for the credentials, I have understanding that we are using that for the login
Hmm.
basically.
Hmm.
This is it, but that is I have the knowledge.
Okay. Now, before we jump to the asset, I have a question for you. Okay. So let's say I am creating a robot. Okay. So let's say I have a sequence in front of me and I have to, let's say I will just open. So you are able to see the UiPath Studio, right?
It's fine.
Okay. So now let's say I have a simple automation, okay, where I have to write a message box, okay, and the message box I want to print a username, let's say hello Mukesh. Now if I run this automation, what would happen?
This will give me just the message, hello Mukesh.
Correct. Now if I just go here and if I just run the automation, it gives me an message box which says hello Mukesh, right? Now, what happens if I want to display a message which says, hello UiPath? How do I do that?
So there are two ways. Like one, you can
Mhm,
save the message. You can take the message from the person
mhm.
from the input and then decide the variable, or else you just change this message box to hello UiPath.
Right. So if I just change here and if I, let's say, change it to hello UiPath, right? So as soon as I get it from the user, that becomes an attended automation, right? Where I
Mhm.
have to get the result from the user, right? Now just think of a scenario where this name is changing as per the environment. So for example, if you are running it my machine, so my machine, it would be hello Mukesh. If you are running it in, let's say, Rajesh machine, it would be hello Rajesh. If you are running it in some different machine, it would be different. So for different user, the value would be changing and we don't know what exactly can be the value. Okay. So let me give you one more other example. Let's say we created a bot, okay, which is just logging into the Facebook. Okay. Simple bot which is used to log in into the Facebook. Now to log into the Facebook, I would require login ID and the password, right? So now if I develop the robot for me, I will give my user ID and the password. When I deliver the robot to you, so what, will my credential work at your place? No, right? Because your credential would be different. Now, if there is a third person who wants to run it with some different value, again, he would have to provide his or her own credential. Now, there are two ways to do it. Either that person should be having the access to UiPath Studio. He should come to UiPath Studio. He would go here. He would change the arguments, change the variables, and then the automation would work. Right? You are getting?
Yes, I'm getting very
Okay.
nicely.
Right. Now, this is one, I just gave an example of a Facebook. Now let's move a little bit towards the project and the technical scenarios. Okay. So every time we log into an application, let's say we have an enterprise application, let's say any HR or payroll application. Now, do you think the credential for every environment would be same? That
No,
when you are developing the credential, the HR people will give you the actual password of their system which they are using and say that now you can develop. No,
yes,
right? So that will be a different password they will create for the developer. There will be a different credential they will create for the tester, and there would be a different credential that they will create for the production, right? So there would be three different credential. Now, if the developer has to code it, now let's say you are the developer and you have to just type the hello username. Now you will say that, okay, so if this is my development environment, so I would just write here hello development, right? But when I deploy this robot to the testing or to the production, how would this value change? Somebody has to come and change this value, right? Because it is changing as per the environments, right? Now I cannot ask the business to every time go and provide this value, because user ID and the password has to be come somewhere safe, right? So that is another example. Now, for that, what UiPath has given, they has provided us something which is called the assets. Okay. You can just think of an assets which are stored at a level of orchestrator. Okay. So this is orchestrator, right? So whatever value you think will change can be stored in the orchestrator. Okay. The value which will differ as per the environment. I'll give you one more example. So let's say you are writing an automation and you have to save the emails in a folder, right? So in the developer machine, the path would be, let's say if I have to save the things in my machine, I would save in my e colon data project and application my CRM. I can save the data here. So do you think your machine or your folder or your machine would have the same path? Do you have the same path in your machine?
no, no.
Right? So if I just go and create automation and I pass it like this, it would work in my machine, but it won't work in your machine. So you would have to come and change this value, right? So for this, UiPath has provided something which is called the assets. We will try to go the assets and then I'll answer all the questions which I have told you, right? So assets usually represent a shared variable or credential that can be used in different automation projects, right? This is important. Now, this allows you to store specific information so that robot can access it. So for example, I told you the example of the credential, right? The HR manager system. So now let's say there is an application which requires a login. So do you think that for every application, I need to create 4 credential if the password is exactly the same? Or should I create the password only once and let it be shared by all the users? How should I do it? So I have a user ID and the password, right? The user ID is the admin, let's say, and the password is password. Now this is the same for all the applications. So what do you think? So if I have 5 applications, so should I create 5 credentials or only one credential that is shared?
Only
Which
one
one?
credential, only one credential which is shared.
Right. So what is the benefit in case if I have to change, if the password username change from admin1 and the password admin1, so I just have to change this one. I don't have to make changes to all the 5 automation, right? So shared thing. But if I am not using the orchestrator assets, what I would have to do, I have to go to each and every automation and pass the value there, right? Pass the user ID here like admin. I go to the automation to pass the value there. Now when it is changing, I have to again come to the automation and redeploy the change. So as soon as I make any changes, I have to redeploy the packet to the orchestrator, right? Because I
Right.
have made the changes in UiPath Studio. How would the orchestrator know? And there are separate orchestrator. One is in the dev, one is in the, so let's say I'll just go back to my other example. So we have three environments: dev, then we have the test, and then we have the production. So in the dev, let's say the team gave me the password as admin and the password as password. Now for the testing, the username is, let's say, tst admin, and the password is tstpswd. And for the production, it's prod admin and the password is, let's say, qwerty. Now if I am writing an automation and if I hard code this value, let's say hard code is in, I provided this inside the workflow. When I run this workflow in the test orchestrator, it will break because the user ID is this. So for that, because of this problem, UiPath has provided something which is called the assets. Now assets are of four kinds. Okay: text, boolean, integer, and credential. Do you understand what is text, boolean, integer, and credential?
Yes, I do.
Okay, right. So text means you can store the string variables like any name, any path. Bool means you can store true, false. Integer is again integer, and this is a special one. We'll talk about this a little bit later, right? Now let's say I have a automation where in the development environment I have to share the save the data in d colon data and Mukesh, because this is my folder. In the testing, when the robot goes to the testing, I will not have this path, right? My path would be something different. Let's say it would be something e colon data something something test. How can I do it, right? So for that, I will go to the orchestrator. In the folder where the automation is going to be deployed, let's say admin folder, I will go and create an asset. Now as soon as I go and create an asset, it would ask me for the asset name, right? So what is this? This thing is a path. So I will create an asset. I will say path, path name, let's say, or let's say I will call it full path. Okay, now the path is of type string, and since I am on my development machine, so I'll simply copy this and I will put it in the text, and I will simply provide a description that path for, let's say, saving the data, and hit create. We'll talk about all this later. Now I have created an asset here which says d colon data and Mukesh. Okay, now if in my UI path there are two ways. One way was to get the path was like this. If I run the file, now I am getting the path hard coded, right? That is d colon data Mukesh, because I have passed it in the message box. But now let's say tomorrow I move this automation to some other developer, or I give this automation to you, or I give this automation to the NFT. So every time the user have to come and change this automation. But since I have created the asset, I don't have to do that. I can simply go to the activity. I will use an activity which is called get asset. So to get something from the orchestrator, get asset. To set something, we would use set asset. Now I'll go and take an activity called get asset. It will ask me that tell me the asset name. So this is the asset name. I'll copy this guy, go back here, paste it here. It will ask me what is the asset value. I will just create a variable str underscore path. I hit control plus K. So that way it will create a variable. And in the message box now, I will use the str path. Now let's try to run this file. Now if I go and select run the file, I am getting I should get the value from the orchestrator, that is d data Mukesh. Now let's say I give this automation to you and you do not have this folder, right? So what you can simply go, you can edit this asset, and now instead of this, you can just change it to UiPath and update. So now if you just simply rerun the automation, I don't have to change any automation, right? Do I need to change the code? No, I just simply go and run the file, and now it will give me D colon data from UiPath. Now, if this automation is completed and I give this automation to the testing team, so now let's say this automation is moved from dev to the test. Now the testing team can go to the testing orchestrator. They will simply go to this asset and now they will create this asset again in the different orchestrator, and here with the same asset they will just write their value and update. And now when this robot will run in the testing environment, what would happen? It would give me the pass or the path from the test one.
Yes.
Does it make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Now, why we have this different kind of asset? So path you understood, right? Because the path would be different. So anything, so path is just an example. One other example is, let's say in the development, whenever the process is successful, you are sending the email ID to yourself. Let's say this is my email ID, right? Because I am doing the development. So I told the bot to send an email to this email ID. Now, when I go to the testing, my email id should not, the bot should not send to email id to me, right? So let's say now the bot needs to send an email id to a email which is test@gmail.com. Now in the production, I think we should now not send an email to here. We would use, and we would send an email to prod@gmail.com. Now, same thing, same concept here. In the UiPath Studio, I will use to send the email. We have an activity called send email, right? So we can use this guy, let's say send SMTP mail messages. Now, if you will see here in the two, we have to provide the email ID where you have to send the email. So I will go and first I will create an asset in orchestrator. Now, what kind of asset is this? This is a text value, correct? This is a text. So again, the asset name would be, let's say, email address, and I am on the development. So I will just copy my email ID in the text. I'll put it and I will hit create. Now, when I am writing the automation in UiPath Studio, I have used an activity which is called send SMTP. It is asking me whom do you want to send the email. So I'm telling you have to send an email to the person whose ID you would get it from the asset. Okay. Now UiPath will ask me, I will get the ID from the asset. Tell me know which asset. So I will say UiPath that you have to get an asset whose name is email address. Whatever asset name you get in this, you store that asset value in a variable called, let's say, str_email, and you just send an email to whatever value you get from the asset. So that way, now what will happen if you change the environment? All you have to do is just go here and edit this value. You don't have to change anything in the automation, right? Because this is fixed.
Yes.
Make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
But like
Yeah.
suppose like some 10 people are there. So all those 10 people have to open it and they have to change it.
10 people, as in I didn't get the 10 people. Can
So
you? Yeah.
in a team, like suppose with the same thing, some 10 people you are using, I am using,
Uh-huh.
some 10 people are using the same asset. So all those 10 people have to open it and close it, or only the one person will be using the asset and then it will be working on that.
Right. So if you want a different value for the asset, then you would
Uh-huh.
have to change it. If you want it for the same value, then you can exactly use the same. I'll give you one more example. So let's say you are working for a banking project. Okay. And the banking guys say that whenever any customer is making a transaction of 1 lakh, you have to stop the process. Okay. Straight away requirement. The banking guy says that whenever a customer is making a transaction above 1 lakh rupees, you just stop the process and just give an error. Now, as a developer, what you would do? You would go here and you would, let's say, just use an if condition, right? You would use an if condition and you will just check if, let's say, the amount, I'm writing it just like this. If the, let's say, amount is greater than 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1 lakh, then you have to simply stop the process. So I will just use an let's say a message box or something which is, I will just use a message box, and I say that whenever the amount is greater than transaction, we just have to stop the process. Straightforward requirement we implemented, and let's say it is working fine. Now tomorrow the customer comes to you and say that now we don't want the amount to be 1 lakh, we want it to be 5 lakhs. Now how would you change?
Then here it will be again the hard coded. So
Hmm.
I understood that is the reason we have to go to the asset,
Mm-hmm.
create the variable over there, and then we have
Mm-hmm.
to change completely in the orchestrator itself. So
Yeah.
whether it can be 1 lakh, 5 lakh, 10 lakh, whatever it is, like we have to just change the
Asset,
amount.
right? So that is
Yes.
one example. So now if it is 1 lakh, now 1 lakh would be again a type of uh,
It's
uh,
a it,
text, sorry, my bad, integer, right? It would be an integer, right? So
yes.
text, you understood. Integer would be used in some such scenarios which I just gave an example. Bool would be something true and false. Let's say you are writing an automation, and the business is very much dicey. Sometimes they say that okay, we want to send the email. Sometimes they say that no, now we don't want the bot to send the email. Other, so let's say you have deployed this entire automation. Okay, your business comes to you and say that uh, for first, initially they told you that we want to send the email, so your bot is sending the email. One fine day they come and say no, we don't want to send the email. Then again they come say I want to send the email. So every time you cannot go and change the code, right? Because they are not sure. So what I can do is I can simply create a boolean variable, and I can check that boolean variable here. If that boolean variable value is true, right? So how I will get, again the same concept, I will use the get asset. I will get that boolean variable, I'll store the value here. And if I can check if the boolean variable that is to send mail, if this variable value is true, then I will send the email. If it is false, then I would not send the email. So I will just create this asset like this. And when tomorrow the business says, I want to send the email, now I'll just come here in the edit. I'll go and change it to true and update. So which is easier, updating asset or updating the code,
Updating this.
right? Now, the fourth one and the important one is called the credential, right? So credential means simple as the term suggests, credential, user ID and the password. Now for different environments, the password and user ID would be the different, right? Now, if I ask you that give me your Facebook password, will you give it to me? No, right? Because password is something you should not share. But let's say for
Yes.
my application, I require the password. So what we can do is we can always go to the UiPath and I can create. So let's say if you can see, right, I have already created my Gmail ID and password here. Can you see email credential, right? I have created this email ID, email credential for myself. This is my Gmail password. This is my Acme credential. So even if I go and edit here, right? See, I am not able to see my password even though I have created this asset, right? No user is having access to see the password once it is created. Okay. So let's say I have to create a password, this guy. So I am in my development. So how I'll do, I'll go to the add asset, create new asset, let's say credential for, let's say anything, credential for, let's say SAP, I will say. Now I will change it to credential. Now if you'll see, it will ask me for user ID and the password. So now user ID is admin and the password I will pass here. So now if I just toggle this I button, I can see the password. But once you create the password, see, now this password is created in this credential SAP. Now if I go and edit, see this
Yes.
is the mechanism of UiPath, and that is what it is, safe, secure and everything, right? But now if the robot has to use it, right, this admin and this thing, the robot has to use it. Now what I can do is to get the asset, I am using an activity which is called get asset. So if you will see the properties of get asset, it is expecting in the input asset name and the output asset value. But for the credential, I would have two outputs, right? One would be the username and one would be the password, right?
Can I stop you 1 minute? So,
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
suppose my password gets changed.
Hmm.
Over there. Then what will happen? Again, I have to delete it and recreate it, or what will happen
Update,
in that?
just update the password. So let's say now I have to update the password, right? So last time we put this password. Now let's say my password is updated to something A, B, C, D, E, F, right?
Okay.
So I just click on update and it's updated,
Okay.
right? So when I was using the the integer or the boolean or the string asset, I was just having one input and one output, right? One input and one output. But for the credential, I have two outputs. One would be the username and one would be the password. So this activity would not suffice, right? Because this has only one output. So for that, UiPath has provided us with one more, which is called the get credential, right? Specific activity called get credential. This is get asset and this is get credential. Now if you will look at the properties, it is straightforward. Input is the asset name, so let me just put the asset name, which is the credential one. This guy we put. And now if you will see here in the output, you have two outputs, user ID and the password, whereas in the get asset you had only one. Make sense? Because here we are only using one, right? Now, if I go to the get credential, I will get two things. I will get the user ID and the password. Now, if I hover over the username, you see the username variable is of type string. Can you see? It is written in the square bracket. It's a string. And the password is a secure string. That means you cannot see the password. Okay. Let me try to create two variables here. Okay. I will store the username in the variable called username, and let me create a variable for password, and let me give it the type as string only. Okay, both are string. Now if I tell UiPath that I am going to store the username in the variable which is I have created called username, UiPath says okay, go ahead and create the username. But for password, it is not taking as string. It is saying that I require a variable type of secure string. Okay, and you have created the variable of string, so change this to secure string. But a good part about UiPath is you don't have to worry about this one. You just go here, hit Control plus K and give the variable name. So now let's say, let me create a variable secure pswd. Okay, it will now, if you'll see here, now in the variables, UiPath has created a variable for me. And if you see the type is secure string, right? This one we have created, this was not working, but now this UiPath has working. Now let's say when we are getting the credential, I have got passed the name here, I have passed the username, I have passed the password. Now if I have to just use this password, what I will do is, let's say I have to type this password in some application, right? So I can simply use an activity which is called type into. Okay, so type into activity is used to type something. Now here I will use the user ID, that is username, because we have stored it. But again, to type the password, if I use this activity, it will type the password, it won't type the password. So that is why UiPath has provided us with an activity which is called type secure text. See, so in the type secure text, okay, if you go to the properties, it, in the input, it only expect a secure text. And if you just go here in the variable, right, we have two variables, one was string and one is the secure password. Now let me try to give this variable to the this activity. Okay, so I will type here password, it won't take. See what is the error it is giving me. It is saying that I am not able to convert the string to the secure string. If you want to use the secure text activity, you have to give me the secure text variable. And which is the secure text variable? Secure password. So I'll go to this properties, and now let me just change it to secure password. See, it took, right? So that is how the credential work. Now this was all about getting the value, right? This was all about getting the value from the assets. Understood?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Now there would be some scenarios where you would have to set the asset value also. Okay. Imagine a robot, okay, which you are writing, and let's say you are getting the path dynamically. Okay. So here, let's say this path, right? D colon E text, right? This path as of now I have, but let's say you are writing automation which is having two piece. One piece of automation is just to get the path, and the other piece of automation is to do this one. Or let's say I will give one more example. Let's say that would make it more clear. So let's say I have two robots. Okay. I am working on a scenario. I have two robots, first robot and the second robot. Okay. So the second robot, to work the second robot, it needs to read some files. Okay. It needs to read some files from a folder, but which folder, it don't know. Now there is one more automation which is called automation number one, whose job is to save the files. But now where it is saving the file, it will save it at some location. So if I have to tell this automation that you have to read the files from this location, how these two automation will communicate, right? Because this is saving at some different location and this guy is supposed to read from that location. This is just an example. So what we will do is we will create an asset, right? This guy will save the files in some location, and this some location we will save it to the asset. Okay. So from the automation, not only you read, but you can also set the asset, and this guy will get this asset. Let me show it to you. Okay. So get asset was to read the asset, right? Now let's say you are writing an automation and you have got a path. Okay. Now I have to, for the automation number two or the robot number two, I have to change this. So this is an old one. Now I have the new path with me. So now let's say I have a new path. So I will use an activity which is called okay, let me go back here. Set asset. Okay. Now set asset will ask me, tell me which asset you want to update. So this is my automation number one. Automation number will go, it will go here, and now it will simply change the path to, let's say, new path. Now if you will notice here, this path is now E colon data test. Now if I run this automation, now assuming that this is automation number one, so now if when automation number one will run, it will simply go, and let us just wait for the execution. Okay, completed. Now if I go back to the automation here, it's E colon data test, refresh, new path. Now the second robot can read the value from this path. Got it? So that is the first part which we were explaining was get asset, and now these part are called the set asset. This is again useful in scenarios like where you want to maintain a count, a kind of a global count. So let's say there is a value, a variable. That variable you want to increment and check its values throughout all the process. So let's say you have 5 automation, and for all the 5 automation, you want the same value to be used. So how would you do it? Asset is the answer, right? So now if you have 5 automation pieces that uses the same credential, all you have to do is in the 5 automation, you just have to use the get credential activity. You will use this, and now in future if the password changes, all you have to do is come and edit the password here only, right? So I change the password and all the robots will take the updated password now. understood the assets? Any questions? Happy to answer.
No, this was a really nice one, Mukesh. I was really struggling for this topic actually.
Uh-huh.
Very nicely explained. I appreciate your help.
Got it, right? Your doubts are
Yes,
cleared.
yes, I got it.
Okay, perfect. Now I assignment for you. I want you to go to this docs.uipath.com and there is something which is called about assets, right? You just read this guy, all of this, right? Now this will make sense to you, right?
Yes.
Okay. Now there is one more thing in the assets which is called this guy, add robot value, right? So this one I'll tell at a very high level. So if it is global value, that means everyone will get the same value, that is admin and this password. But when we do the real time automation, we have different robots, we have different users. So UiPath has a provision where you can provide the same asset, but let's say this guy. So let's say you are working in an automation where there are different, for different user you want a different value. I'll show you an example. I have created an intro asset name and given a value, global value to UiPath. Now in my UiPath studio, if I use this asset name intro, every time I'm going to get welcome to UiPath, right? Because that is the value we have given. Now let's say there is a user which is whose name is John Smith. So whenever this user is running the automation, I want the robot to give a message of welcome John, because the user is John Smith. Now, if the user is John Smith, the get asset will get the value and it will give welcome John. But if the user is, let's say, a generic one, someone else, Mukesh is logging, he will get welcome to UiPath. But if it is specific user, so for specific users also, you can change the value. So that was value per user. Now there is something which is value per machine. So you can also, again, the same concept for this user ID, you can provide the different value. So this you can try on your machine. So this I would leave it to you. You can just change the values from here and see how the automation behaves. Okay. Okay, fine then. So we are good to close. I hope that
Yes.
was helpful.
Oh, really helpful. Really helpful. I'll go through all the things again, and
Yeah,
if I have, I will just drop the email to you.
perfect. I'll answer that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Bye bye. Okay, so that is all for this video. I would like to wrap this video here. Thank you for watching. If you like this video and find this video insightful, please do subscribe to the channel, and happy automation.